In this lesson, we're going to learn about archetypes and about my favorite, which is the archetype of the hero. In particular, we're going to be learning about the work of an Austrian psychoanalyst named Otto Rank, who was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud and who outlined in one of his books the 10 characteristics, which he called the myth of the birth of the hero. I want to give credit to my colleague, Dr. Katherine Grimes, who designed this PowerPoint for a talk that she gave in October 2020 to faculty and students of the University of Santiago in Compostela, Spain. We start with the work of Carl Jung. The concept of archetypes is drawn from Jung's work. He was a psychologist who lived from 1865 to 1961 and is well known for many reasons, two of which are relevant to our study of the hero myth. I'm going to start with the one on the bottom of the slide, which is the concept of archetypes. Archetype is just a kind of a fancy psychological word for pattern. So when we talk about archetypes, we're talking about patterns that exist in human psychology, in our consciousness, culture to culture, regardless of characteristics like race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. Archetypes are patterns that are familiar to all human beings. One very familiar archetype is that of the underdog. Most accounts of the story that in European literature we call Cinderella are based on the underdog archetype. So the notion of the archetype is that there is a pattern, which is kind of like a template. It's the basic framework of a story. And all of the different versions of that story which exist with different cultural details might be called variants of that archetype, variations of the archetype. There are about 800 variations or variants of the Cinderella archetype worldwide, starting in about the 8th century in China. In all those variants, there may be different cultural details, such as what kind of a shoe the Cinderella figure wears on her foot that causes someone later, like a prince in the European versions, to be able to identify her. In Native American versions that follow this archetype, it would be a moccasin. In versions from the Arabian Peninsula, from the Middle East, would be a sandal. In versions of the variant from Africa, the Cinderella figure might be barefoot. But the notion is that there is this pattern that varies culture to culture, but that anyone in any culture could recognize because of the characteristics of the archetype. There are two prevailing theories about why these archetypes exist in all cultures. The first is travel. Human beings moved around the world. People moved as Marco Polo moved, for example, from the southeastern part of Europe, trying to find a trade route to Asia. People moved around. They took their stories with them. They carried these patterns with them as they moved, and they shared them culture to culture. That theory has some problems, and you can probably imagine what those problems are, particularly in times when travel was much more limited than it is today. So it's probably unlikely that that theory would completely account for the prevalence of archetypes. The second is the other notion that's associated with Jung, and that is the idea of collective unconscious. If you've studied Freudian psychology, you know that the unconscious is the aspect of our psychology which involves thoughts and feelings, ideas that we may not specifically connect with full awareness. In other words, they may be ideas that are buried in human psychology. The notion then is that these archetypes are an aspect of this collective unconscious, that they're a part of the sort of package, if you will, the package of patterns that you might imagine as existing in the psychology of every human being. So that culture to culture worldwide, every human being would have this inherent kind of recognition of an underdog story. Joseph Campbell is an American mythologist. Mythologist is probably a slightly less familiar word to you than psychologist. Campbell began studying the Hindu scriptural text and noticed connections with other scriptural texts he was familiar with, became interested in studying mythology as kind of an offshoot of his study of religion. He has several well-known books. The one about the hero archetype and the way that these characteristics of heroes vary culture to culture is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And we'll be talking about that later on in the course. The Power of Myth is about why myth resonates with us, why aspects of myth are meaningful to human beings, again, in various cultures. That particular book is the basis for a public television program in the United States in the late 1980s or early 90s, hosted by the journalist Bill Moyer. I highly recommend it. It's available on YouTube. It's a multi-part series. In The Hero's Journey, Campbell outlines a kind of a diagram or a scheme, which he calls the mono myth. And that is the pattern of the hero's journey and the notion that this pattern exists, again, as an archetype crossing cultures. Mono, the prefix mono means one. So the idea is the one myth, kind of like the One Ring in the Lord of the Rings series. It's this notion that there is this kind of one mythic hero pattern that is common in all cultures. Most of our time we're going to spend today with Otto Rank, who, as I said, is an Austrian psychoanalyst, contemporary of Freud's. And the work of Rank's that we're going to talk about today is a book called The Myth of the Birth of the Hero, published in 1909. In this book, Rank discusses what he calls 10 basic characteristics of the hero myth. We're going to go through those, talk about some well-known examples. I won't be talking about all the examples on every slide, but you're welcome to think about those for yourself, as well as how they apply to other hero myths you might know. And then we're going to go back through the slides and we're going to talk about characteristics apply to the Harry Potter series. So be thinking about that. Characteristic number one, the child is the son of royal or even immortal parents, but often is unaware of his true parentage. Oedipus the King in Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, in a dramatic work from ancient Greece, as a child is separated from his parents. We'll talk about the reason for that on an upcoming slide. So he grows up with other people having no idea who his parents are until much later in his story. But his parents happen to be the king and queen of Thebes, Laius and Jocasta. In the case of Jesus, his earthly father is Joseph, but his heavenly father is God. And of course, as a young boy, he has no sense of his divinity or the mission that awaits him. In the stories of King Arthur, his father is Uther Pendragon. But again, as a boy, Arthur has no idea why he is being raised instead by someone else. He has a sort of a foster family, which is an experience that's very common in hero myths. So again, characteristic number one, the child is the son of royal or immortal parents, but often is unaware of his true parentage, raised by other people whom he thinks of as his parents. Number two, difficulties may precede the hero's conception. And I would expand this a little bit to say difficulties are irregular circumstances. In some cases, as in the story of Jesus in Christian theology, Jesus' mother is a virgin, so the conception is immaculate. In other cases, there are unusual circumstances surrounding the conception. The story of King Arthur is one of the best examples, and that story is that Merlin disguises King Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, so that Uther Pendragon resembles his enemy. This sounds a little bit like the use of the polyjuice potion in the Harry Potter series. Uther Pendragon resembles his enemy. He has intercourse with the enemy's wife, Igraine. Arthur is the result. So that's not exactly a difficult, but it is an irregular circumstance concerning Arthur's conception. Number 3, the child's life is endangered by a dream or an oracle, perhaps prophecy, warning typically the father or another male royal person that the boy will be a danger to him. Terrific example of this is the story of Moses, in which there is this prophecy concerning Hebrew boys, putting Moses' life at risk, and consequently his family feels that they need to make a plan for him that will help to keep him safe. Also in the story of Jesus, because Herod has had this terrible dream about a Hebrew boy who will grow up to be a threat to him. For that reason, Jesus's family, even after his birth, decides to go home from Bethlehem a different way from the way that they've planned, because they want to make sure they stay away from the people that Herod has sent out to kill Hebrew children. The boy is separated from his parents. Again, the story of Moses is a great example, or the story of Arthur. In the story of Frodo Baggins, which I haven't mentioned yet, Tolkien writes that his parents were killed in a boating accident when he was a boy, and that's the explanation for why Frodo is sent away to live with his cousin Bilbo Baggins in the Shire, where Frodo grows up. In the story of Jesus, the separation from the parents actually comes a little bit later. And one of the few stories in the New Testament about Jesus's boyhood is that there is the time when his parents take him to the temple and they leave to begin their journey home and realize that Jesus is not with them because he stayed behind to talk to others in the temple. So number 4, the boy is separated from his parents. Characteristic number 5, the boy is exposed, often in a basket or another receptacle. So here again in the story of Moses, when his family decides that he is not safe with them and he needs to be sent away, his mother puts him into a basket. Sister take it down to the Nile River and set it afloat in the river, where eventually it is found by the daughter of the Pharaoh, and Moses is raised as the adoptive grandson of the Pharaoh, as the adoptive son of the Pharaoh's daughter. Same pattern exactly with Romulus and Remus, the founders of the city of Rome, and Sargon of Akkad, the first king of the Akkadian Empire. In Edda's case, it's a little bit different. There is a prophecy that he will grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. You can understand why parents would be alarmed by that kind of prophecy. So Oedipus' parents have him sent out to be exposed, in other words, to be left in an open place out in the wild where they presume that he will die or be killed. Instead, Oedipus is taken by a shepherd who takes pity on him and who gives him to another couple to raise as their own son. Number 6, the boy is put into water, either to kill him or to save him. Again, in the story of Moses, once Moses is put into that basket, set afloat the Nile River as the family's way, hopefully, of rescuing him, and he floats down the Nile where he is found by the daughter of the Pharaoh. Number 7, the child is rescued by animals or by people associated with animals, often shepherds. Romulus and Remus are a terrific example of this. When they're found, they're raised by wolves and then go on to fulfill their destiny. I didn't put The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling, which is actually a 19th century novel and not exactly a myth, on the slide. But the story of The Jungle Book, the story of Tarzan are good examples as well. Stories of, in both cases, English children who for some reason are in Africa, separated from their parents, and who end up being raised by animals instead. There's a significance to that. We'll talk about it at the end of the slideshow. Number 8, The baby suckled, reared by animals or lowly persons. Obviously, if a child's abandoned in the wild and raised by animals, child has to be nursed. So it's the animals who will end up doing that. This is an illustration of Romulus and Remus being nursed by a she-wolf. In some myths, if the hero is not specifically raised by animals, if he's raised by humans, they will be humans of generally low social standing, often shepherds. Jesus' earthly father, again, is a carpenter. So humans of low social standing, if that's the case. Number 9, the hero is eventually recognized as a hero, often because of a mark or wound. Odysseus, the hero of Homer's Odyssey, when he finally makes his way home from fighting in the Trojan War, is recognized by a member of his household because he has this very identifiable scar on his leg. Oedipus has foot scars from said to have been born with club, a deformity in his foot. And also, if I remember correctly, I think his parents have his ankles tied together when they send him out to be exposed. Jesus, of course, has the stigmata, the wounds in his hands from the nails when he's fastened to the cross, and also a wound in his side from having his side pierced by a spear. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how this one plays in the Potter series. Characteristic number 10. The hero is reconciled with his father or someone who represents his father, or he exacts revenge upon his father. So we'll have one example of each one. In the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, there is a terrific illustration of this notion of reconciliation with the father, when after Joseph has revealed himself to his brothers and he sends them home to get their father, Jacob finally is brought, and he is reconciled with his father, who is overjoyed to see him because he has long since thought that Joseph was dead. In the story of Moses, when Moses grows up to lead the Hebrew people out of Egypt, he is enacting revenge upon his father at that, or upon his adoptive grandfather at that point. The pattern is there, it's just that the details are slightly different. Oedipus, in the story of Oedipus Rex, when finally he's an adult, he's returning to Thebes, runs into his father at a crossroads, there's a confrontation, he ends up killing Laius without at that point having any idea that he's killed his own father. So either reconciliation or revenge. The general point here is heroes have father issues, and those always have to be worked out before the resolution of the story. Now we're going to go back through those characteristics, and we're going to talk briefly about how they fit the Harry Potter series. Number 1, the child is the son of royal or even immortal parents, but is often unaware of his true parentage. This one fits kind of with the Harry Potter series. James Potter and Lily Evans are certainly not royalty, but they are people who are characterized as really popular Hogwarts students. Harry's father having been a member of that group of marauders, which were well known for their pranks in the Hogwarts castle, makes James kind of an icon, I suppose, in his student generation. The fact that Lily Evans was beloved of Severus Snape sort of gives her a special status as well. Obviously, we know as readers that it would take a very special person to have Snape's affection, since he seems to have a very difficult temperament. But again, not royal, not immortal, although the search for immortality is a theme in the Harry Potter series. So this one fits kind of imprecisely, I think we have to say. Number 2, difficulties precede conception, and in some cases, the mother is a virgin. Frankly, not at all with regard to the Harry Potter series, at least based on what we know from the 7 volumes that J.K. Rowling wrote. Number 3, the child's life is endangered by a dream or an oracle that warns the father or another royal personage that the boy will be a danger to him. Obviously, there is a prophecy involving Harry. It does not involve Harry's father, James. It involves instead Lord Voldemort, who is not specifically a royal personage, although he does take that title Lord for himself. So again, this is a characteristic that fits, but kind of imprecisely in the Harry Potter series. The boy is separated from his parents. Strong fit here, obviously, because of the fact of James and Lily. That's when Harry is 1 year old. Harry is separated from them from that point forward, raised instead by the Dursleys, who are his aunt and uncle. The boy is exposed often in a basket or other receptacle. Harry's rescued by Godric's Hollow and taken to the Dursleys' house in Little Whinging, and Dumbledore meets Hagrid there. You probably remember that Harry's placed into a basket, which is left on the Dursleys' doorstep. This is a really common pattern in English novels about characters who are foundlings, who are found as infants left somewhere. So another characteristic which fits very neatly with Harry's story. Number 6, the boy is put to water, either to kill him or to save him. This one requires a little bit of thinking, but it does fit in at least 2 specific instances. The first is that when all those owls begin to come from Hogwarts and Vernon Dursley is annoyed and increasingly frightened about what's going on with their attempts to inform Harry of his special status. You may remember that Vernon takes his family out and eventually they get into a little boat and they go out to an island, very small island with a little shack on it in the middle of the water, and that Hagrid then has to cross the water to come to inform Harry that he's a wizard. In addition, when the first year students go to Hogwarts, we see that there is this kind of initiation ritual that they have to cross the Hogwarts Lake. And this happens only in their first year. In other years, they get to the Hogwarts castle by other means. So characteristic number 6 also seems to be a tight fit. Number 7, the child is rescued by animals or people associated with animals, often shepherds. We might be tempted to say no to this one, but if you think about it, Hagrid is certainly one of Harry's primary mentors and bodyguard, for lack of a better word. He really is helpful to Harry in a number of ways. Certainly he's associated with animals. He teaches care of magical creatures several times during Harry's time at Hogwarts. Technically, his title is Keeper of the Keys and Grounds, but unofficially, he's the Hogwarts gamekeeper. So I think we also can say that number 7 fits in the case of the Harry Potter series. Number 8, the baby is suckled or reared by animals or lowly persons. Not suckled, perhaps, but he is raised by his relatives, the Dursleys, and I think their position on a relatively low rung of the social ladder is reinforced by Vernon Dursley's ambition, his need to make a good impression on his boss, the fact that they like to entertain people who are of a higher social standing than they are. Again, we might have to say this one fits imprecisely, but it does sort of have a connection. That pattern is there, that the hero ends up being raised by foster or adoptive parents because his own biological parents are incapable of raising him. He is eventually recognized as such because of the mark or wound. This one probably needs absolutely no explanation. It's Harry's lightning scar, which makes him recognizable even in a way that is annoying to him because people in the street stare at him and point to the scar on his head and recognize that he is Harry Potter, and long before he has any idea what the significance of that wound is. And number 10, the hero is reconciled with his father or his father's representative, or he exacts revenge upon his father. In the case of the Harry Potter series, I would say the first of those 2 things is true, and there are several examples of how this fits. First of all, Harry has to be kind of reconciled to a new sense of who his father is, to a kind of new identity for his father when Harry becomes a young man and learns about his father's legacy at Hogwarts, the fact that James was not always particularly nice to his classmates, particularly cruel to Severus Snape. So he's sort of reconciled with his father's memory in that regard. But he also is certainly reconciled with other characters who represent his father and Two very good examples are Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, who has been one of James's best friends, with whom Harry is reunited in Prisoner of Azkaban, and briefly has a home during the works of the Harry Potter series, and also Remus Lupin, who teaches Harry the Patronus spell, which becomes really important to him in terms of protecting himself and protecting other people in some cases. So let's talk very briefly about what explains the appeal of archetypes. On the slide about the heroes being raised by animals, I promised to explain why this is important. And for mythologists, and I think people like Otto Rank, they would say that this significance is that all of us have to recognize our essentially animal nature and our humble beginning life, regardless of what we subsequently achieve. But the heroes being raised in low circumstances is a reminder of those ordinary, humble beginnings and of our animalistic nature. Psychologists also say, the Freudian psychologists at least, that most of us view our parents in an ambivalent kind of way. We want them to help us when we need it, but we also want to have independence from them so that we can pursue our own identity and our own goals and ambitions. And the themes about reconciliation and revenge with the father, particularly if they coexist, they exist at the same time, sort of model that ambivalence, our feelings about our parents and maybe other authority figures. Like the hero, we identify with and aspire to greatness and to achievement. And the notion of the hero, in many cases, being the son of a god or goddess or the son of king and queen, appeals to our sense of perhaps viewing ourselves in the image of a god. In Christian theology, believers are encouraged to behave in the likeness of God in a God-like way. So that's consistent with that idea. And finally, for all of us, thoughts about our own mortality are raised in hero myths, particularly those that, as the Harry Potter series does, have this theme about achieving immortality and whether that's a good goal or not. We'll certainly be dealing with that when we talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'd like to paraphrase William Shakespeare at this point. Shakespeare wrote in one of his plays, he characterized the notion of death as shuffling off our mortal coil. In this particular case, we might say that our bodies are mortal, that at some point we will shuffle off our muggle coil. That's the conclusion of our discussion of Otto Rank and the myth of the birth of a hero. If you have questions about this lecture, please feel free to email lwhited@ferrum.edu.